Thank you very much, Ms. Wilson. And I just want to give a shout out actually to you and to all of those who have been assisting you in making it possible for us to have this wonderful conference. And I want to thank also all of the presenters. And I probably should ask the presenters to mute their microphones until they are called upon to speak. And that will allow us to have a better quality of presentation. Let me just start. I won't be very long. I am just delighted to be the moderator of this program, and I give thanks, all thanks, and honor always to the ancestors, African ancestors, who have made it possible for us to be able to advance a concept of humanity that is founded on the basic principles of Ma'at from the ancient Nile Valley civilizations. And I also want to give thanks to the native peoples of the Americas, people who were basically decimated in the discovery and the founding of this country. In fact, two principal problems existed at the very beginning of the American nation. One was the decimation and the genocide of the native peoples, and the other was the enslavement of the African people. And by virtue of that, what we have witnessed over the last many years, hundreds of years actually, have been an evolution in the development of resistance to racial ranking and the notion of ranking of people on the basis of a biological concept, which we now know is not real, but a social construction. So this conference, second in a series that we're having this year, we have one more, November the 2nd, but this series actually was developed in response to many of the crises that we have faced in the United States of America, but we know it's a world crisis. And we know that there are people in the world who have been looking at and studying various responses to these issues of race, racism, anti-racism, and then there have been a few people now who have asserted the common humanity of all peoples. And we are one. The Temple Circle of Afrocentricity has always articulated the idea that all human beings on the earth are descended from one African woman who lived around 300,000 years ago in East Africa. So we, in that sense, see Africa as our origin, our home place as human beings. So dealing with fundamental issues of white supremacy, white racial domination, the notion of the ranking of people on the basis of the melanin in their skin and those kind of false ideas really has been the job and the work of many intellectuals who have studied African peoples, whether we have studied the African peoples in South America, like Brazil or Colombia, whether we have studied African people in Uganda or Nigeria or Tanzania or Sudan or Egypt, which was called Kemet by African people before the Greeks called it Egypt. We have always been engaged in advancing a notion of human harmony and commonality and expressing, in a sense, the great values that are articulated by the ancient philosophers in Ethiopia and in Sudan and in Egypt and in Zimbabwe and in Ghana, Mali, and other places. So we're happy that you have all come, and I know that there will be others who will be joining us in this wonderful, wonderful treat that we have of these incredible scholars, and I appreciate them for even giving us this time. I mean, We are very honored because we have some of the outstanding scholars and intellectuals in the world with us today. I'm going to introduce the first speaker, and the first speaker is Dr. James Nazir Conyers, who is the university professor at University of Houston. He's the head of the Africana Studies program, and he has published more than 40 books. Has been the mentor of some of the most outstanding people in our field. He is a professional activist in the discipline. He's won many awards as editor, author, scholar, and institutional builder. Among his books or works he's done on Carter G. Woodson, Malcolm X, Charles Houston, Muhammad Ali, and of course, I'm pleased to say he did a book on me even. So he is quite an intellectual, quite a wonderful scholar. And I just wanted him also to take about 10 minutes. Each person will have about 10 minutes to give us a presentation, and then we will go from there. The names of the speakers will appear on your screen, but the order, I have the order myself, and I'm using that order. The next speaker will be Dr. Gamich, but right now, Dr. Conyers.
Thank you, Dr. Asante. I wanted to provide just for about 8 to 10 minutes a work that is getting ready to come out, and it's looking at COVID-19, criminal justice reform, and colonialism, a reflective adjustment for poets. COVID-19, criminal justice reform, and colonialism provide a juncture in the current life experiences for African Americans in modern times. Unprecedented in American culture has there been a pandemic intersecting with the closing of the economy, unjustified homicide of African Americans by local law enforcement, and the reclamation of internal colonialism ethos. Certainly in the spring of 2020, such transactions manifested, which pivoted the national storyline in America to engage the subject matter of race relations, stretched between issues of reservations regarding local law enforcement, unemployment or underemployment, and criminal justice reform in the context of a national election year. One may query perspective and sustainability of Africana sovereignty. Currently, the encounter of these themes acknowledged are located in a posture of referencing terms that we use such as left-right or liberal-conservative. Position forward, seldom if any of these definitions are provided. Condition and context is arbitrary, and the analysis is non-consistent. Reflexive historical commentary of Malcolm X is relevant, with him saying, "I'm not a Democrat nor a Republican," and got sense enough to notice. Even more important, threaded to this treatise, is the concepts of racism and racialism are pertinent, but even more germane is the continuous alignment of disparate treatment exhibited towards African Americans in employment, healthcare, and local law enforcement. Encountered in this dialogue is the prolonged enabling of the creation of subordinate group status with emphasis on Black ethos, motif, mythology, and history. Intriguingly, on May 25th, 2020, African Americans were to suffer a storm, witnessing on video the execution of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota, at the hands of local law enforcement. Consequently, the narrative of wrongful death has transitioned, transformed, and transcended to a preemptive query: who life matters? As the civil and criminal cases of wrongful death issues come to court, what then becomes the value of African Americans' existence? Our interrogation is centered on the pursuit of propriety or prosperity, justice or acquisition of settlement claims. or facilitating a system of discernment in addressing inequality of concerns related to both federal and state law enforcement. Captured in a moment of reflexivity, Americana culture reacted. Black people paused, and the impact of enabling institutional racism was acknowledged. Centered at the vortex of these issues is the cultural and historical consciousness, meaning if context and memory are removed, remissed, and unresolved, individuals perhaps might seek to retain structural materialism assets rather than provide correctives to actions of injustice exhibited towards African Americans. Indeed, the influx and intersection of theology and politics were exhibited. However, it was the context of cultural clarification which provided a form of correctives. Resolved to describe and evaluate this issue for perplexity, this essay in brevity just provides a survey assessment of the themes outlined, offering an Afrocentric perspective in the process to interpret data from Black newspapers, daily newspapers, books, and scholarly journal articles. For many, there was the acknowledgement the incident on May 25th, 2020 was erroneous. Paradoxically, in the minds of most African Americans, this was normative regarding the social injustice exhibited towards African Americans by local law enforcement. Evoking the name of transition personnel, I call on George Floyd, Amadou Diallo, Philando Castile, Eric Gardner, Breonna Taylor, Eleanor Bumpurs, Rashard Brooks, and numerous others. We could actually go back to looking to 1984 in the Bronx, New York with Eleanor Bumpurs. We can go back to looking at Amadou Diallo in February of 1999 in the Bronx. We could look at Eric Garner in 2014, Staten Island. We could look at Sandra Bland, 2015 in Prairie View, Texas. We could look at Philando Castile, 2016 in Falcon Heights, Minnesota. We can go back to Amabu Arbery, Brunswick, Georgia, 2020. Breonna Taylor, as we mentioned, March 2020. Daniel Prude, Rochester, New York, March 2020. George Floyd, May 2020. And Rashard Brooks, June 12, 2020. And then also coming up to Jacob Blake in August of 2020. Just to mention this, and kind of just going very quickly to COVID and pre-existing illnesses, matters of stress, racism, and racialism are relevant variables as we attempt to review the impact of COVID-19 on the African-American community. And query pivots to context for the African-American world community to describe and evaluate the narrative of systemic racism in America. Descriptions matter, and even more important, cultural competence is appropriate. Moreover, the opening of public schools, focus at elementary and secondary schools are key issues regarding phase transitions, pause, or closed status having impact on the economy and workforce. Let me just go to some concluding comments in the short period of time that I have. Currently, Americana society is at the crossroads of vexing issues of protest, participation, and petitioning authoritarian personalities. Still, there's the residual aspects of denial concerning the existence of systemic racism, which is embedded in popular and national culture. For example, Juneteenth is now being presented as a national holiday, which is already a celebration in Texas regarding the abolishment of enslavement in Galveston in 1865. In point of fact, it is the passage and enforcement of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution, which offers confirmation of constitutional liberty for Blacks. Wordplay locates some challenges vis-a-vis the ideas of African Americans being enslaved and experiencing a Holocaust. Threaded to this thought is the continuity of subservience. In a historical assessment, social stratification then focuses on who gets what and why. Because of the impact of involuntary migration and institutional racism, Blacks have been marginalized and subordinated to attain equity of resources. Retained, reserved, and restricted in this analysis is the basis of outlining the core foundations of a Black labor class in America. Over the past month, the concept of racism has been explained to have several meanings and interpretations. Realistically, mentioning realistically mentioning based on the retention of a market economy and the attrition of African Americans' advancement in the public sphere. The playbook is familiar, yet the formation has changed minimally. During the early 1980s, American society, anchored in right-wing conservatism, echoed the ideas race is no longer a significant issue, which affects the outcomes of African Americans' quality of life. Indeed, this cohort of neoconservatives steered views which became a national campaign during the 40th and 41st presidential administrations in this country. Even now, current United States presidential candidates are making pundit commentaries with an arrogance, privilege, and assumption of retaining African American support with electoral votes. Scarcely did we engage these issues in the past or now, outside the parameters of structural analysis, and present a global Pan-Africanist perspective in the description and evaluation of the political climate. In closing, perhaps we can engage and meet the next decade to situate and position Africana personnel in an alignment of sovereignty and autonomy on a national and international level from an Afrocentric perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Conyers. Our next speaker is Dr. Marquita Gamage, who is Professor of Africana Studies, California State University in Northridge. She is the author of at least 2 important books, many articles. She's become one of the most significant Afrocentric intellectuals in the contemporary moment. Her research interests focus on overt and covert representations of racism and sexism as they pertain to media-generated images of Black womanhood. Among her books is the popular representations of Black women in the media, the damnation of Black womanhood. I present to you now Dr. Marquita Gamage.
Hotep, and thank you all for joining us. I'm happy to talk with you all about what I'm terming media racism. If I can share my screen, that would be great. I have a few images that I would like to use to contextualize our discussion.
I believe, Jasmine, are you able to do that? Yeah, great. Thank you, Jasmine.
Thank you. So I want to talk about how media is used to advance anti-African, anti-Black sentiment, and really promote the advancement of white supremacist racist propaganda. So I want to first start off by defining what I mean by media racism. So media racism is media entities used to market racist white supremacist ideologies about a particular racial group. It can take place in news outlets, including news reporting venues such as newspapers. It can take place in television and film, radio, print advertisements, and social media. Media racism was birthed out of the historic use of racist labeling of Africans and is based in the institutional power to control the image of an entire group of people. It is a byproduct of institutional racism. And as such, media racism serves the political, cultural, and social interests of white supremacy. Media racism continues to advance racist political agendas, for it provides imagery that parallel anti-African political climates and policies which help rationalize the targeting of African Americans as non-citizens in the 18th and 19th centuries, second-class citizens in the 20th century, and unfit for citizenship and even life in the 21st century. So it's important for us to use that barometer to assess media in general, but more importantly, how media is being used to rationalize the systemic attack on Blackness globally. So how do we see this within a historic structure? We see that early American television and film primarily produced media that reinforced white American culture and white racist views of other cultures. It was a promotion of white supremacy and white superiority and Black inferiority. We saw thus media was anti-African propaganda. We saw Black performers were limited to stereotypes that did not threaten the white power structure. Early film productions such as Birth of a Nation in 1915 continued the minstrel scenes which depicted racist ideas about Black Americans, which framed Blacks as unintelligent, criminal, and hypersexual, which helped rationalize the public brutality and attack on Blackness. This film set the stage for the cinematic criminal mistreatment of Africanists on screen and is still highly today. We saw that the legacy of media racism continued for decades later. But in particular, let's look at in the 1960s, how in 1967, the Kerner Commission documented the heightened presence of racism in the media and how media used racially biased reporting and production practices that validated racist ideologies about African Americans. However, it didn't end there. We saw the continued misuse of media to control the narrative around Blackness. Take, for instance, the media's focus on the African American woman during the 1980s, quote unquote, crack epidemic. What you saw was that the media overly reinforced and overly sensationalized the ideas around Black mothers as crack mothers, despite the medical data that was national data showing that it was, in fact, white American women who were giving birth at higher rates to children with cocaine and crack cocaine in their system. So although the national data existed, news outlets reinforced the public sentiment and racist ideas about Black mothers as criminally unfit for motherhood, despite the fact that the data proved otherwise. So what you see from this historic legacy is that not only have Black people been criminalized and mistreated in the media, but we see a modern take on this criminal mistreatment as the weaponizing of Black bodies. We see that media images of Blacks are inflated with messages of criminality and social unruliness. Reality television shows, for example, seem to be infatuated with showcasing Black women and men as chronically violent, animalistic, and threatening. These racialized portrayals of Black people work collectively to situate their humanity as one of the primary dangers facing the American public. So we see Blackness is broadcast as pathologically dysfunctional, self-defecating, criminal, hypersexual, and a threat to the American public. Therefore, Black womanhood has been confined to Eurocentric notions of femininity, which for Black women is hypersexual. Hence, at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement and the call for justice for Black women like Breonna Taylor, we find ourselves immersed in discourse around WAPs and entanglements, right? How ironic that these become center stage at such an important and critical time in our fight for our humanity. We see these racist representations of Black bodies in the media are used to weaponize the existence of Blackness and therefore justify the injustices Blacks experience in all American institutions and globally, which include educational, the economic structures, the criminal justice system, and by and large, by the general public. So what we see here is that America is known to then single out its threats in an attempt to neutralize and destroy them. It goes to war on those very things that it deems to be acts of terrorism against itself or a threat to its sovereignty. And so African Americans are very familiar with these tactics. At its exception, America launched wars on Blacks in order to maintain white supremacy and the white supremacist power structure that has erupted into several battles over the decades. We are very clear about those battles that took place in enslavement, but we sometimes forget about the battles that took place even with silent protests, like the silent protest parade in 1917. We also see even when African Americans are not protesting from early on in this country's inception, and especially once African Americans became citizens, it began to challenge the American racial status quo of Black inferiority and white supremacy by simply living economically dependent and having self-sufficiency in terms of education, economics, and so on and so forth. We found that itself challenged the racist status quo and resulted in massacres and race massacres and riots against African people, like the Tulsa massacres of 1921. So even when we're not protesting, the simple fact of us affirming our humanity, affirming our right to be citizens and exercise the liberties of citizenship has resulted in these war tactics against us. We saw the peaceful protests of the civil rights era resulted in violent terrorism against our bodies, our communities, our homes, our children. We saw the bombing of Black homes and communities, the violent military-grade assaults during the Black Power movement. And we see the public lynching, once again, of Black bodies during this current Black Lives Matter era. So we see this all are results of the war on Blacks. Media racism has been used throughout these battles to validate America's lethal and legal tactics for the war on Blackness and to promote that war. Thus, terrorism against Black is pro-American. That's why you see the current commentary around African Americans call for justice and fight for freedom in this country to exercise full citizenship rights, including the right to life, as an act of terrorism against our own country, as an illustration. And so you see our own president calling the Black Lives Matter movement, calling Blacks' call for justice unconscionable. He's calling it stupid at times, right? He uses terminology along with many others to reinforce white supremacist ideas around Black inferiority, and that essentially Blacks have a minor and marginal existence in American society that's meant solely as in a position of servitude, and if not in servitude, then not to have life at all. However, African Americans haven't simply accepted this type of systemic mistreatment of their bodies, of their lives, of their communities, of their families. Instead, we continue to fight back against this, yet there's a war of terror against Blacks. We see that mass media has often been used to disguise the war on Blackness by publicizing messages and images of Blacks as pathologically threatening to the sovereignty of the nation. By positioning the Black body as a dangerous weapon, America has ushered in a host of political, judicial, legislative, medical, social, and economic attacks against Blacks. Media has advanced and promoted these racial ideologies and warring tactics to justify the systemic assaults. Therefore, understanding the function of weaponizing Blackness through the media can help us better fight the current and anticipate the future warring strategies against African people. So in combating this, we see that in combating the predominance of negative images of Blackness in the media and mass media in general, we see celebrations of Blackness and calls for justice serve as a form of Black racial pride, while at the same time operating as advocates of Black cultural values and a means to empower Africana people globally. Implicit in the construction of celebratory and social justice images of Africana women, men, and families is the embracing of our historical legacies, our cultural phenomenon, and the African worldview systems, which work together to construct media that is authentically reflect what it means to be African, what is just, and what is human. So how do we disarm media racism? We must free ourselves from its consumption, one. We must create counter narratives that challenge white racist supremacist propaganda, two. And three, by creating media that affirm our humanity. Whether or not it's digested, received, applauded, rewarded by mainstream white America, we must continue to invest in Black media productions that affirm our humanity and transcend media into a tool for our liberation. Thank you. Oh, Dr. Asante, we can't hear you.
I muted in order not to have you listen to my papers rustling. Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Gamage. Dr. Suzuko Marakawa, Associate Professor of History and African American Studies at Chicago State University. She is the first Japanese scholar, actually, to declare competence in African American scholarship. She has taught in the United States, in Puerto Rico, and Japan at the college level. Her publication interests are African American athletes as long distance runners and reviews of Afrocentricity. In fact, her major article, The Significance of Afrocentricity for Non-Africans, Examination of the Relationship between African Americans and the Japanese. She is an outstanding teacher with high recommendations from all of her students. At this time, Dr. Marakawa.
Thank you so much, Dr. Asante. Good afternoon. I'm highly privileged and honored to be a part of this virtual dialogue for Temple's Africology department. With my former colleagues, very nice to see our friends and mentors, including my lifetime professor, advisor, and mentor, Dr. Asante. Thank you so much. I'm now actually logging in from Southside Chicago, actually from Japan at 2:30 in the morning. So I may not be as sharp as I should be, but I'll try my best and to convey my message in the next 8 to 10 minutes. So in this brief talk, I'd like to revisit Afrocentric subjectivity and cultural agency in this age of racism, globalization, quote unquote, and multiculturalism, and how we can advise our students to live with ethical, cultural, and social responsibility in the 21st century. I developed these ideas mainly for undergraduate students in higher education, but I believe these are also applicable for high school and graduate students, as well as little older or mature educators like ourselves. So my main argument today is to emphasize the significance of our intellectual endeavor as Afrocentric educators and scholars that stems from an effort to uncover the stories of people of color from our own perspective beyond simple binary black and white racial framework or globalism, cultural imperialism, monoculturalism, and ethnocentrism, as well as with a careful scrutiny and critical examination on recent idea of globalism, multiculturalism, transnationalism, transculturalism, cultural hybridity, cultural homogeneity, and so on. So today I'm not going into each ism, but the myths of these isms are usually based on failure of addressing domination subordination scheme within the composite social systems, and also based on beliefs within the dominant group that their cultural practices are superior to other cultural groups using their own values and standard. What is dangerous in the 21st century is how the dominant culture absorb underrepresented ethnic groups under the banner of multiculturalism, globalism, and so on. So in order to achieve the valid pluralism without hegemony and hierarchy, it is essential to ensure a harmonious interaction among people and groups with plural, varied, and dynamic cultural identities, as well as our willingness to understand each other, which must be based on each individual cultural agency and subjectivity. So here are just only 2 points. I'm going to be very brief, actually, within less than 10 minutes of the cultural orientation, how to be an intellectually and culturally centered person with broad perspective of the world with integrity, harmony, humanity, empathy, and also respect to other cultures. And first and foremost, of course, is to have critical insights from and into our own cultural center. And that's to be critical and examine our own cultural location. As a core of Afrocentricity, I re-emphasize here and cultural location. So in order to be culturally sensitive to others in so-called today's borderless, quote unquote, the global society, examining our own culture, history, communication patterns, values, and the way we interact with people and the world is crucial. So we really don't know as much as we think we know about our culture and ourselves, and it is easy to be manipulated by the information from the internet and social media in these days. And such careful examination should be really based on analytical or historical perspective, because the past causes the present and so the future. And the only through history we can understand our world, worldviews and social system, and also see how things change, as well as comprehend the factors that cause change. So we often rely on collective values, which must be very surely honored, but it is also important to examine what is actually being said and not said, and with an awareness of ambiguity sometimes and subjective shading of social and cultural expressions between what is intended and how it's interpreted. So this also makes us understand the diversity within group more in depth, and ultimately leads to embracing different cultures in and outside our own cultural group. So we should use our subjectivity to understand our world, create knowledge, and communicate with others. For this reason, critique and examination of our own culture are indispensable. And the second thing is just my own, like a personal feeling for this little addition, is to seek for authenticity. So I personally, I'm here is only because of the family emergency, but I usually like to travel all over the world, including Africa, Americas, Caribbean, and all over. And I also emphasize to experience those cultures directly. So we're living in so-called, quote unquote, again, the borderless world with abundant internet social network information. They're full of stereotypes and superficial understanding of the world, through technology. And we need to personally and directly connect to the people and places, and the authenticity and distinctiveness of culture need to be verified in person. And actual connection with people, different culture of different cultures, gives us to be open-minded, and also the flexibility without generalization of the people. It's too bad that we can't really free travel at this time, but I always tell students to travel extensively and expect to be surprised about what they see, hear, taste, smell, touch, and simply because life won't go the way we plan, and people don't think that the way we think. So how we respect each other and culture, such as their spirituality, way of thinking and behavior. In other words, how to let people view the world in their own cultural perspective, should come from our positive self-concept and our own cultural esteem. And in my personal opinion, actual and direct encounter with different culture really gives us authenticity to our knowledge and intellect beyond history books. So in conclusion, through the Afrocentric perspective toward the world, I myself was able to understand not only African cultural agency, but also the agency of Asians or Native Americans, and the whole human science that stresses holistic and inclusive ways to approach human knowledge, which our identity transcends geographically or political borders, geography or the political borders, and also assume the responsibility that can be derived a broader context, that is the broader context, that is the humanity. As a result, I learned how to amass profound knowledge and valuable insights into the subject and human nature, as well as how to view and understand the world. So my mission here is to uncover the stories of Africans, Native Americans, or any people whose voice have been suppressed because of colonialism, enslavement, racism from their perspective, and to debunk the myth of minority and powerlessness, as the people of color are in the overall majority and powerful. And I strive to convey such messages to my students wherever I teach throughout the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Markawa. And you should go and get some sleep. So we really appreciate you for being here. Our next guest and speaker and scholar is Dr. Dimitri Bondarenko, who is the Principal Research Fellow and Vice Director of Research at the Russian Academy of Sciences and the Institute for African Studies. And I should just point out that I met him earlier this year before COVID in February in Moscow. And in my judgment, he's probably Russia's leading scholar of African Americans, and he is one of the leading scholars on Africa. His book, I always tell people, because I was really shocked. You may not be able to see this, but this is his book on African Americans and American Africans. This was a study that he did, coming to places like Philadelphia and other cities in America, and it's in English. It's translated. You don't have to read Russian to be able to read his book, but he is one of the people that I really interacted with and found him to be a very strong intellectual. He's the author of many books and articles that influenced world scholarship. And his recent book, the one that I just pointed out, deals with migrations, histories, race, and identities. Has been translated into English. His theoretical concept of homoarchy has become a major idea in the discourse around race and ethnicity and culture. So I'm happy and delighted to introduce Dr. Bondarenko from the Russian Federation.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Santa. I shall say, first of all, that I'm really honored to be among our colleagues, though virtually, and so it's my really great honor and privilege to talk with you now. Well, I've just thought that it would be not a bad idea if I concentrate on the life of African migrants in my home country, in Russia, and well, probably because I guess this is a topic which is very little known, well, to the wider academic world. So, and so let me tell you about African migrants in post-Soviet Moscow, based on my fieldwork I have been doing for many years among Africans in my home city. It would be difficult to understand how African migrants can try to live in the Moscow of the 21st century, without acknowledging that certain historical particulars of Russian society pose specific challenges to them. For one thing, Russia does not have as long-lasting, diversified, and contradictory history of interaction with Africans as most Western European nations do. In addition, the closed nature of the Russian society in still more or less recent Soviet times and the difficulties of the reforms of that transitional period complicate the matter even more. The national mass media have also played a negative role. Until the late 1980s, the image of Africans that the media spread was generally always positive, as a people struggling against world imperialism and economic backwardness. But during Gorbachev's perestroika and in its aftermath, Africans were often represented as symbols of hopeless savagery. It was also implied and even openly stated that by helping African countries, the communist regime had just been wasting money instead of making friends with the so-called civilized world that is the West. Today, this attitude towards Africa and its inhabitants remains alive in the consciousness of a portion of the Russian population. There were quite a number of racist acts against Africans in Russia, especially between the late 1990s and the early 2000s. It is an erroneous view, though widespread in Russia, that there were no racists in the Soviet Union and that they suddenly materialized in the turbulent post-Soviet society. Racial prejudice does not sprung from nothingness, and even in the 60s, and furthermore, in the time when popular belief in communist ideology was decaying, there were people who disliked racial others. But in that time, the Soviet power oppressed everything what did not correspond to its official ideology, including racism, effectively. While after the breakup of the Soviet Union and when it was weakening, so everything, both good and bad, got a chance to manifest itself more expressively, including racism. Yet my research leads me to agree with a colleague who stated that, I quote, in general, Africans are assessed by Moscow Russians without steady negative associations and do not have the status of enemy in the mass consciousness of Muscovites. Besides, it should be noted that in the last decade, violent manifestations of racism have become less frequent than in the 90s, which of course does not mean that the problem of racism is eradicated. Another evidently most popular view of Africa and Africans portrays them as exotic objects of curiosity. It is not by chance that Africa has become a popular destination for wealthy Russian tourists. For those that share this view, Africa is associated with heat, bananas, hippopotamuses, and so forth. There is no aggression in this perception, but it does reflect the fact that people are not ready to accept Africans' presence in Russian city streets as an everyday reality. This oversimplified and one-sided image of Africa and Africans, exploited by film producers, TV soap opera and sitcom directors and advertisers. One must also consider that Russians, especially the young, have very little basic knowledge about African culture, ethnography, history, geography, and so on. However, it is worth noting that in recent times, African art and photo exhibitions have become quite frequent events in Moscow's cultural life, and many young people can be seen in the exhibition halls on these occasions. Schools of African drumming and African dance schools, run mostly by native Russians who may attract Africans to teaching, are becoming more and more popular among young Russians in Moscow and other cities. Despite this apparent appreciation of African culture, for example, in my survey, only 36% of almost 100 interviewed Moscow University students were able to name at least 5 African countries. The current national immigration legislation is more liberal than in Soviet times, when the country was actually closed to potential migrants of any sort. Yet it is still very difficult for a foreigner to gain a permanent resident or citizen status. The easiest way to do so is the same as it was in the USSR, to marry a citizen of the country. Our interlocutors from national human rights organizations have told us that very few of those seeking refugee status, including Africans, are granted it. All in all, the Russian migration laws remain generally rather opaque and hence still leave enough room for arbitrary interpretations and corruption in their practical. This is particularly due to the continuing discussion, both in the public sphere and various governmental circles, over whether migrants are beneficial to Russia and about what desirable ethnic, cultural, and educational professional priorities should be introduced as selection criteria for accepting them. Options vary from the idea of only welcoming ethnic Russians, especially from the former Soviet republics, to that of opening the doors to the country as widely as possible. At the same time, the situation regarding migrants from Africa has changed radically with the breakup of the Soviet Union. By the end of the Soviet era, almost all Africans studying in the country were university and college students. They were spread rather evenly among numerous education centers all over the USSR. Today, the overwhelming majority of Africans in Russia are concentrated in a limited number of large cities, and particularly about 10,000 of 40,000 Russian Africans are concentrated in Moscow. What is very important is that the number of students from Africa coming to Russia has decreased considerably, while in the 2000s, the visa regime became tougher than in the preceding decade, but still in Russia today, we have many more than students, many more Africans who claim the status of economic or political refugees. They have absolutely different educational background. They get absolutely different treatment from the state compared to students, especially to the students of the Soviet time. Actually, they come without very limited knowledge of anything about Russia, without any knowledge of the Russian language, and they are not taught the language as the students were and still are and so on and so forth. So African migrants most frequently estimate themselves as partially adapted to their new Russian reality. Research has shown that many Africans experience difficulties in adapting to life in Moscow. For many, if not most, present-day newcomers, matters are complicated by many issues, including those I have already mentioned, like very limited knowledge of Russian lifestyle, also differences in climate, and so on and so forth. And I shall say that today we have two very distinct groups of Africans in Russia who are in very, I shall say, complicated relations with each other. The one group are those who are living here for already 20 or 20 plus years. They are actually mostly Soviet graduates who got Russian citizenship, and they are, well, business people, university teachers, medical doctors, and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, we have many more newcomers who are people who are absolutely another sort, so who try just to adapt, not to integrate into the Russian life, into the Russian society, what the first group of Africans is doing, but rather to just to adapt to the hardships of life in Russia they have to face. So, and finishing my short talk, so I shall say that in sum, since the early 1990s, the social composition of Africans in Russia has changed markedly, what I have tried to tell you, and has become more heterogeneous. This is occurring simultaneously with the number of African migrants exceeding the level of being just a barely perceivable minority in Russian cities and regions, with Moscow serving as their most important hub. And my final argument would be that although really we have a small minority of Africans or people of African origin in the country and in the city, well, they're becoming really more and more noticeable, and neither the state nor the society is prepared to accept them adequately up to now. So this is a problem to be solved actually in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Bondarenko. Appreciate you for that wonderful presentation about contemporary life of Africans in Moscow, in Russia. Dr. Rahel Kasahun is the director and the curator of Africa Unbound Museum in Addis Ababa. She is also the founder and the director of that museum. She worked for the World Bank in Washington and also served as a consultant for the development program in New York. And she's taught at the University of California, Riverside, and a native Ethiopian. She holds a PhD in economics from the University of California as well, and is actually one of the most inspiring people that I have met in terms of African culture and the development of African museums and art. At this time, I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Kasahun.
Thank you so much, Dr. Asante. What a privilege. I'm really enjoying listening to all the presentations so far, and I'm looking forward to what's going to come from this point on. I hope you can hear me well. Our connection is not very good today. Greetings, everyone, from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I'm going to be short because I'm worried about the connection, so I'll speak quickly. But if there's any, if I need to slow down or if I need to clarify some points, please let me know. Okay, so racism. Let's talk about racism. For me, racism is stems from ignorance. Ignorance about who we are, where we come from, why we're here, all of that, and it's rooted in a worldview that sees ourselves as separate entities, and it sees us as separate from our source, and just a lot of separatism and disconnectedness. It's rooted in that kind of consciousness as opposed to a unity consciousness. So when we're talking about ignorance, what are we talking about? For example, Dr. Asante, you mentioned that every single one of us, every single person who lives on this planet today can trace our lineage back to a single woman who lived here in the eastern part of Africa just 200,000 years ago. That wasn't very long ago. I mean, human history goes back to 4.4 million years. And when you look at, when we think of how long our species has been on the planet, and then, you know, the fact that scientists have found out that every single human being living on the planet today can trace their lineage back to this one woman. And when you know, so that we all have this, we share this common great grandmother. It's you know, it's a mind-blowing, it's a huge, it's an eye-opening fact. So, you know, it just shows how inextricably connected we really are. Not just, you know, of course, in terms of the DNA has proven that, but our ancestors have always known that we've always been connected. There is no human being is an island. You know, I'm sure most of you know about the philosophy of Ubuntu. It recognizes that we are inextricably connected to one another, and this longing that we have to connect and reconnect with one another is not just some emotional need. It's rooted in our beingness. So, you know, it's racism does not understand that very important fact about who we are. There's also this idea about this inferiority and superiority complex. These are basically, you know, the same. One cannot have a superiority complex without feeling inferior to something else or to someone else, and the other way around. So it's again, you know, it's lack of understanding of who we are and how we exist in the world that has brought all this, you know, the atrocities and all the slavery and the imperialism and colonialism that was based on this idea that certain race or the white race is more superior than black or the, you know, brown race, and therefore has the white man's burden, that the white man has this responsibility to civilize the world. But they didn't know that we actually do have a lot of wisdom that can actually save the world today if we knew how to tap into it, and if we can connect to it. And there's a lot of knowledge and wisdom that our ancestors have been practicing for millennia. There's also racism, the whole idea about racism discounts certain types of knowledge generation. For example, it puts empiricism over intuition, divination. These are kinds of forms of knowledge that our ancestors have practiced for many years to understand not just the world that they lived in, but also the cosmos, and learn about what could to tap into the realms outside of what the rational mind can access. You know, the rational mind can only take us so far, but if we want to learn more about the universe that we live in, you have to engage other faculties or other forms of knowledge. So all of these forms, what we have been holding near and dear and what our ancestors have been practicing for many years have been ridiculed and discounted, and because of that we've lost our we've lost our ways, basically, in short. So, as a result, what do we have as a result of this worldview that has prevailed in the world over the last 500, 600, 700 years? We have an economic system that puts people before profit, and we've seen what that kind of greed, corporate greed and individual greed, can create the kind of destruction that has been created in the world. Beyond the brutality and the killings and the deep sense of trauma that has been that our people have suffered, we're also now seeing the impact on our environment and what the kind of devastation that is all around us comes from this form of thinking and seeing the world. We also have social systems that promote tribalism and individualism. Tribalism has been something that many societies in the world have suffered from, including here in Africa. It's devastating. It puts groups of people against each other, and sometimes it's based on our physical attributes, other times it's based on just certain ways of just certain understandings that are very faulty. Individualism is something that affects mostly the quote-unquote developed world. The UK, the government, a couple of years ago, established a ministry of loneliness, because loneliness has been such a major problem in that society. People are living in a very disconnected way, and then the economic system being what it is, promoting individualism and just go and get yours, doesn't no need to worry about the community. All of that has led to some serious implications in terms of well-being, mental well-being, and other ways. So they're now trying to address some of these issues by establishing a whole ministry. So these are some major challenges that are now developed countries are beginning to grapple with. So where do we go from here? The first thing is we need to learn about our culture, the richness of our culture and our heritage. And people like Professor Asante have contributed so much in that way. Sheikh Anta Diop, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Marcus Garvey, and many others have produced so much to teach us who we are as a people, and the depth and the beauty in our culture and our heritage. So, we need to start there. We have to go back and engage in this very introspective process, and this process, this Sankofa, to go back and get the wisdom and knowledge of our ancestors. What did they know? What did they do with what they know? And they've done so much. And if we learn about these, about who they were and what they knew, that can really help us address some of our intractable problems, the issues that we have been grappling with for many, many years, and we just, haven't made much progress. So there was a lot of wisdom. There is a lot of wisdom that we can draw from to help us address our issues, including racism in today's world. And then, we have to take a very honest look at where we are today, informed, very honest look at where we are and who we are, and where are we today in terms of socially, politically, economically, and to help us understand how do we want to shape our future. What kind of future do we want for ourselves and for our children and their next generations? We have to identify what our ideals are. our ancestors did have that. You know, they had different kinds of systems like Ma'at and Ubuntu. These are self-governance systems that were working very well in many ways, including in terms of restoring justice within the community. So it's about understanding what we had in the past, where we are today, and then coming up with, you know, just identifying our ideals in terms of the kind of life we want to live and how we want to exist in the world as global citizens, not just as Africans, as, you know, as an Ethiopian or as an African American, but, you know, as global citizens where we can go to Russia or, you know, India or any other country and in the world and feel like we belong. And this is this is our world, and you know, sense of belonging, because we are one people and we come from one mother, and we have the right and responsibility. So I'll end it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kasahun, for that powerful presentation. And now we go to Dr. Iyeli Ichile, who is a professor at Prince George's Community College outside Washington, D.C., where she also heads the African Studies program. She's a popular professor, used to teach here at Temple University. She's taught at Howard, Florida A&M, Goddard, and Montgomery County College in Rockville, Maryland. And she holds her PhD in history from Howard. And the students always mention her here at Temple. So at this time, Dr. Ichile.
Hi, everyone. Greetings. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What I would like to do is to share my screen. Let's see. I have a bit of a presentation. Is that visible?
Yes.
It's a beautiful painting by John Biggers. Okay, good. John Biggers is one of my artistic and intellectual muses. This is an untitled piece that will form the background of my presentation. And I've titled my talk today, Seeking Sankofa equals Seeking Self. And instead of only kind of offering information and solutions, I think one of our roles as people with advanced degrees, particularly in Africology and Africana studies, African American studies, Black studies, for those of us in this field, I think our role is to raise important questions, to examine problems, and to suggest and refine tools with which our community can solve its own problems. And one of the ways in which I think we can offer tools is to really help us access that humanity. This conference today is about accessing humanity as a way of getting outside of a racial ranking system that is problematic for our people. And so I like exercises. We're gonna do an exercise today at the top of my presentation. So I think this might be useful in terms of, again, accessing our humanity and accessing the authenticity that Dr. Morikawa talked about, in terms of building togetherness that Dr. Kasahun just mentioned, the Ubuntu concept. So this is going to be a guided visualization. If you all will indulge me with your focus and your attention, if you'd like to, you can close your eyes, whatever brings you to focus. Just take a deep breath. And in your mind's eye, please imagine a body, an African body. This body, in the picture of your mind, represents the African collective, the global body of African people. Take note of what it looks like. What is its size? What is its shape? What is the nature of it? Once you've got that picture, imagine this African body in a place that is safe. What does this space look like? What is this safe space like? What is there? What is not there? Imagine now that the African body in your safe space is now in a sacred space. What needs to happen in order to make this space sacred? What does it look like? Where is it in this world? Finally, if you will, please imagine this African body in this safe and sacred space as a strong body. Strong in mind, strong in the physical self, and strong in spirit. How does the strength within this body present itself? What is the source of this African strength? To take our visualization a step further, I ask you, how might this African body you imagined be adjusted or reshaped to be more inclusive, to add more, to represent more of our African community? Who is left out by your imagining of the body of African people? How can we reshape this body, transform this body to bring those individuals into the fold? Thinking about the safe space in your mind, how can this safe space be fortified from a wider variety of hostile forces? How can we make this space even safer than we originally imagined? From hostile forces internal and external to the body. Are there other sources of strength for this body of African people that you may have overlooked? What else animates and strengthens the African collective? Continue to breathe, take note of your breath, take a mental snapshot of what you've created. If you'd like, please share your comments and what you may have seen in your mind in the chat. I'm interested in creating a document of sorts of what we imagine. I think this is really important. Visualizations are very important. Please make sure when you're typing the chat that you include all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your responses if you feel like sharing. But this is important for us to envision a future of empowered African people. If we do not take the time to focus inwardly and imaginatively, we cannot make it. Everyone participating in this panel today and everyone watching is a product of the imagination of our ancestors. What happens if we put our personal visions together that we created today with those of our family? What if we do this exercise with our organizations of which we are a part, the communities in which we live? How do we synthesize all of these visualizations of a healthy, strong, safe, sacred African collective? Well, I'll tell you, and the rest of my presentation is really going to be about what doing this visualization with myself and with community has taught me. Just a few ideas. All right, let's move ahead through the presentation. I want all of my work to look like a John Biggers painting. That's me. So this is a scene from a cartoon my daughter used to love, Kirikou and the Sorceress. And one of the major things that I took away from this painting is the painting of all of the people in Kirikou's village, is that everyone looks different. Everyone has a different personality, a different approach to Kirikou, a different approach to solving the problem the problems that beset the community, a different approach to the sorceress, a different approach to collecting water, everything, right? And what I came away with is unity does not require sameness all the time or perfect consensus. Can we as African people move toward empowerment, move away from some bottom position in a world ranking despite the diversity of us? Kwame Ture said, you know, people think unity is sameness, but it's really about unity of purpose, right? If I'm paraphrasing. It's about what we want, not necessarily just about what we don't want. African people are the most genetically diverse in the world, not simply because we were first. We know everyone else and all other racial groupings are derivative of that original mother that Dr. Kasahun mentioned. But our biodiversity is also because our ancestors carefully curated our lineages. They understood and were guided by the understanding that over time, sameness breeds weakness and that there is strength in diversity. In other words, unity doesn't require us to do all of this African stuff the same exact way. That would be a weak strategy. So there are many different African liberation lenses, different categories, different approaches. I've given some of these approaches a nickname. Health is wealth. These are the folks that are focused on health and diet, eating right, veganism, all these other wonderful things. Herbalism, the keepers of our knowledge and traditions based around health. Black Wall Street, those who are interested in an economic analysis, whether that is to build wealth or to critique capitalism. Those of us who are worried about spirituality and concerned with the soul level struggles going on with African people, the restoration of our spiritual cultures. Those who are interested in dealing with what Malcolm X taught us, that only a fool lets his enemies educate his children. Those who are interested in homeschooling and taking charge of the knowledge and educational growth of our babies. And finally, those who come from a mental health perspective, a restoration of African consciousness and balance through the mind particularly. And we know that all of these different categories or these different approaches are connected, interconnected. We could even maybe identify ourselves on one of these spectrums or within one of these categories, but there's always overlap. Each is necessary. We don't have to push every African person we meet into our preferred category. We must look at ourselves as a body, again, with organs and systems based on an array of cell types, each with its own function for the whole, despite the fact that each cell has its own clear role and vulnerabilities. The solution is never to chop off a piece of one's own body because the pancreas doesn't do what the eyeball does. The goal must be to look at the differences as part of an uninterrupted whole, to take inventory of our body, to seek and identify the utility of each part. And through this, our judgments, many of our contentions can easily turn into appreciation and a healthy strategy. I think this is really important, and I got a really great idea from participating in the Sankofa conference, which happens in DC every year. I'm going to skip ahead a couple things. Last year, the theme of the Sankofa conference was reconstitution and resolution, and I loved these two approaches to a praxis of liberation. Let's look at the definitions. Reconstitution, to build up again from parts, right? Sheila Walker reminds us that African people in the diaspora have essentially been the scattered body of Africa, right? Osar in all of his different pieces that must be put together again. To reconstitute also means to change, inform, and organize. What is it about the best of our African selves, our best of our African culture that we must adapt, transform, and evolve for use in the 21st century and beyond? And finally, to reconstitute something is to restore it to its original state, usually by adding water or liquid. Perhaps people of African descent have become culturally ashy, and we are in need of moisture What is it that waters us? What is it that feeds us and restores us back to our state of health, right? What are the historical processes by which we were dried out in the first place? And how do we use the understanding and examination of those things to put ourselves back together again? Resolution, the other component. To be resolute is to make a firm decision to do something or not to do something. Where in the world can we find African people who have been resolute? What are historical examples of African people who were resolved to be about certain things, to have certain things, to not have certain things, to accept and tolerate some things, and to completely block and have complete intolerance for certain things? Finally, resolution is about solving a problem, a dispute, or a contentious matter. Again, going back to this concept of watering ourselves with our culture, we must really look at where our water comes from. Where's the water in our homes? Where is the water in our organizations? When I think of water, I think of where is the flow? What allows things to flow? Where are our processes for cleansing? That is energetically cleansing, communicating clearly. Where are our processes by which we can resolve conflict and do peace building within ourselves, our communities, and our organizations? They say water no gets enemy. Where is our water? But also in looking at our community as sacred, safe space, we must add the other elements, right? Carolyn Shola Ariwa teaches us that any altar has all 4 elements, or 5: air, water, fire, and earth. And then there's spirit, which is always there. Well, where's the air in our organizations and our homes as we resolve to solve our problems, as we put ourselves back together again? Harriet Tubman was a master of understanding how to build community safe space. Not just a safe space she hoped to bring us to on her journeys, but she also created safe space along the way. She watered her passengers. She watered her people. She even gave spiritual baths. She thought about peace building and conflict resolution because she had to solve a lot of those internal struggles along the way. The air, speaking life into our situations, literally through breath, maintaining prayer and positivity, practicing the essence of Oya and allowing for change and evolution. Oya never puts things in your path that you don't need. And the things that no longer serve your higher purpose, she blows them away. And we must be able to release those things as well. Letting things come and go as they serve our needs and as they do no longer serve our needs is very important in terms of air. Where's the fire in our organizations? Black folks are really used to experiencing all kinds of fire, but where's the cleansing fire? Again, the fire to do away with what no longer serves us, the fire of defense and self-protection, unapologetically, the fire of passion for our mission, the passion for each other, and putting that as our top priority. And then finally, where is the earth? Harriet Tubman was a master herbalist, a deep connection to Asaseya, the Akan term for our Mother Earth, the sustainer of life. The proverb says, Asaseye duru, the earth has weight, and we must connect back with it, whether we are farmers or simply people who practice environmental justice. We must not reproduce our oppressor's destruction of our natural world. Otherwise, none of this is sustainable. To connect with our healing traditions, to find practices that ground us and keep us consistent to our word within our organizations and families and community. These are the important things that will, again, create empowered Africans, safe Africans, whole Africans, and will allow us to transcend anyone else's understandings of racial rankings that would have us anywhere other than where exactly we want to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ichile. And I just, for the rest of the panelists, I just want to remind you, we have 10 minutes to try to make sure that we get finished on time. And we appreciate all of you for taking time to think about this. Dr. Raylan Rabaka is professor and head of ethnic studies at the University of Colorado. He's been called a leading Du Bois scholar. He's the author of several important theoretical works, including the new Routledge Handbook of Pan-Africanism, which I'm fortunate to have got a copy yesterday in the mail. I appreciate it very much. He is the author of more than 50 scholarly articles, book chapters, and essays, and more than 14 books, including Du Bois's Dialectics, Africana Critical Theory, Against Epistemic Apartheid, W.B. Du Bois and the Disciplinary Decadence of Sociology, Forms of Phenomenism, Frantz Fanon's Critical Theory and Dialectics of Decolonization, Concepts of Cabralism, Amilcar Cabral and Africana Critical Theory, The Negritude Movement, Hip-Hop's Inheritance, Hip-Hop's Amnesia, and the hip-hop movement, among others. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to present Dr. Raylan Rabaka.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, Dr. Asante. And I'm going to try not to be delinquent as I used to be when I was back there at Temple with you. And I'm gonna try to stick to the time. So in the interest of doing that, I'm just gonna go ahead and return or read my prepared thoughts and everything so I can stick with the time. Hopefully I can do this in less than 10 minutes. So the title of my presentation is called Black Radical Political Family. Black Radical Political Family, an address to Africologists. And I'm just gonna go right into it. I've spent most of my life researching and writing about people who have tried to change the world, mostly because I too want to change the world. Black radical political figures and movements attract me because of what they might teach us about past and present conditions and how we might shape the future. Over the years, I have learned that things are not always as they seem, and that the desires, hopes, and intentions of people who fought for change cannot be easily categorized, contained, or explained. Unfortunately, too often our standards for evaluating social and political movements revolve around whether or not they succeeded in realizing their dreams and goals, rather than on the influence and lasting legacy of the dreams and goals themselves. If we embrace this either or, all or nothing mentality, virtually every Black popular movement failed because the basic power relations they sought to change remain intact. And yet, it is precisely these alternative visions and dreams that inspire new generations to continue to struggle for change. And it is the people who led and were active members of these movements that I consider Black radical political family members. We are not merely related through biology, but even more, we are related through ideology, through Africanity, through our shared views and values and commitment to struggling for a world where all of us can develop to our fullest potential. We are family in the sense, we are family in a sense that frequently flies in the face of racialization and colonization, because our sense of family and community transcend the social constructions of race, gender, class, sexuality, and nationality, Ubuntu. Our humanity and dignity requires historical grounding, cultural education, and political power. Despite constant exploitation and perpetual oppression, Black people have courageously been the driving force pushing the United States toward the ideals it incessantly articulates, but has never achieved. In recent years, we have taken to the streets, launched massive campaigns, and impacted elections. But most often, our elected leaders have failed to address the legitimate demands of our lives and struggles. The situation has gotten critical, and we can no longer wait. We have to move beyond the mainstream and turn our attention to many of the forgotten and often forsaken peoples and movements that haunt the pages of US history. We have to hear and heed the words of Black radical political family members, such as the Combahee River Collective, who stated in 1977, the most general statement of our politics at the present time would be that we are actively committed to struggling against racial, sexual, heterosexual, and class oppression, and see as our particular task the development of an integrated analysis and practice based on the fact that the major systems of oppression are interlocking. The synthesis of these oppressions creates the conditions of our lives. As we move beyond the mainstream and turn our attention to Black radical political family members, we might also hear and heed the words of James Baldwin, who exclaimed, "You were not expected to aspire to excellence. You were expected to make peace with mediocrity. Know whence you came. If you know whence you came, there is really no limit to where you can go. The details and symbols of our life have been deliberately constructed to make you believe what enslavers and oppressors say about you. Please try to remember that what they believe, as well as what they do and cause you to endure, does not testify to your inferiority, but to their inhumanity and fear." In response to the sustained and increasingly visible violence against our communities in the US and globally, we have to come together with renewed energy and purpose to articulate a common vision and agenda. And this is precisely what we are doing here today with this conference. We must become Black radical political family that centers and is rooted in our communities and not just in college campuses. We must recognize and remind others that we have a shared struggle and stand in solidarity with all oppressed people. Indeed, collective liberation will be the product of all of our collective struggle. We have to commit to acknowledging and honoring the lives, struggles, and leadership of the most marginalized among us, including, but not limited to, those who are women, queer, trans, gender nonconforming, formerly and currently incarcerated, poor and working class, differently abled, undocumented, and immigrant. We must be intentional about amplifying the particular experience of racial, gender, sexual, and state violence against women, queer, trans, gender nonconforming, and intersex folk. There can be no Black liberation for any of us if we do not center and fight for those who have been marginalized and exploited. Africology has and must continue to bring people together to create and amplify a shared agenda so that we can continue to move toward a world where the full humanity and dignity of our people is respected and protected. Africology obviously extends beyond the United States because we know that patriarchy, heterosexism, capitalism, militarism, and racism constantly crosses borders. We stand in solidarity with our international Black radical political family against the ravages of global capitalism, human-made climate change, war, and exploitation. We also stand with undocumented and immigrant people all over the world, but especially here in the United States. We also recognize and honor the rights and struggle for land, self-determination, and reparations for our indigenous radical political family. Africology must articulate and support the ambitions and work of all progressive people, especially those of African ancestry. We must also seek to intervene in the current political climate and assert a clear vision of the world we want to create. And we have to be bridges for those who claim to be our allies and help them evolve into our advocates. We must reject quick fixes and false solutions and solemnly believe that we can bring into being a complete transformation of society, which sadly consistently places profits over people, greed over need, and make it impossible for most of us to live decent and dignified lives. In closing, I'm about to close, Dr. Asante. As we leave this conference and go out into the world, let us all embody the change we want to bring into the world. Let us concretely contribute to the reorganization of society based on the collective needs of the most marginalized and oppressed among us. Finally, if nothing else, let us remember and recommit to one of the fundamental principles of Africology, which is the belief that if we could free the most oppressed people in our society, then everyone else would also rescue and reclaim their full humanity as well. In the weighted words of Audre Lorde, quote, "If I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own, then I am not free. And I am not free as long as one racially colonized person remains chained, nor is any one of you." Thank you to Town 9.
Thank you, Asante Sana, Dr. Raylan Rabaka, for provocative conversation. Dr. Kimani Nehusi, Associate Professor of Africology, Temple University, is a major scholar of ancient Africa, African history, and Caribbean history. He's spoken at universities and workplaces in various parts of the Caribbean, the USA, Canada, Europe, and Africa. He has held positions in universities in Guyana, London, East London, and was founder and director of the Africa Studies Center at the University of East London, and is currently research associate at the Institute for Economic Research and Innovation at Sewanee University of Technology in South Africa. His books include Libation, An African Ritual of Heritage in the Circle of Life, Sabayet in Kemet, The System of Education in Kemet, and A People's History of Guyana. Dr. Kimani Nehusi.
What's up, everybody? I just want to record my great delight of at being in this company and making a presentation. What I want to talk about briefly is, well, just some reflection on this encounter of ourselves in our time. One of my countrymen, Martin Carter, said that in one of his poems, the more the people of our times we are, the more our time is. And this is a call to action. We must make our time into what we want it to be, more and more. And we meet at the confluence of ourselves, Black Lives Matter, a pandemic. And it occurred to me that there's some large issues that we could look at and, help ourselves as we move forward. And part of this is the opportunity this condition, this situation offers us to advance our discipline. I think we have to keep thinking about this. And that as we do our work simultaneously, we rediscover ourselves as African people more and more. I mean, we've had a lot of examples today, and I think it's important for us to try to bring all of these different things that different people are doing in our community and see what picture we're getting. We, in this repairing of ourselves, and the word reparations was used, and I throw it out there very, very boldly and say this is something we need to consider. Quite a lot of what we are doing. Reparations for us must also include the rediscovery of ourselves, the reconnection with our history and our culture, a growing practice of this more and more. We must assert our African humanity. There are different ways of being human. And other people have tried to tell us that we must be their way of human. Actually, I think that a lot of that is inhuman. But it's important for us to recognize that African people have a specific tradition of being human with different expressions of different aspects of that tradition. And that we must assert more and more that African humanity by the things we do and how we do them, how we return to our own culture. And perhaps this is the profoundest way of doing anti-racism and promoting harmony. I think it's Dr. Ishmael said that, harmony doesn't mean or should not mean that everybody must be the same. And it's important for us to recognize that difference is part of the experience of the world. There are always going to be genuine differences. And if we decide to ignore or misrepresent genuine difference in anything we do, we're starting off on the wrong foot and doing ourselves to some level of disaster. Difference, however, should not mean the storm. And very often, because we're scared of difference, we've been taught to be scared of difference, to avoid differences. We never recognize that difference is not the real problem. The problem is how we deal with difference. And we cannot deal effectively with difference if we do not recognize difference. So for me, returning to ourselves as Africans means to be ourselves in certain ways and to offer examples, powerful examples to the world. I have an engagement with libation, and I notice more and more of our people are returning to practice libation. And it seems to me as though this is one way in which we articulate not only a sense of harmony, a sense of community, but it helps to articulate our understanding and engagement with the environment. We are people who always practice the preservation of the environment. And a lot of that has been lost for too many of us. We don't see the fact that people say, well, I'm not going to eat this, or in a certain area, people avoid consuming certain animals or plants. And we have sacred groves in our traditions. All of these things constitute environmentalism. I don't want to go too deeply into it. And you didn't set out to go on a hunt without making the solemnest pledge to the divinity concerned that you wouldn't engage in wanton killing. Our acquisition of resources from Mother Earth was governed by need, not by greed. You didn't go out and shoot animals, murder them, and say that you're practicing sport. That was impossible in our people's understanding of things and organization of life. And I'm offering this as a way of saying we have been undone by a culture that is often inferior to ours. We could say that now, because that's the truth. And if we're going to return to ourselves, then these are some of the things we have to do, and we've got to be very, very straightforward, honest, and determined about this. I want to say one or two more things. That in the language of our ancestors, the Medu Neter, ancient Egypt, there were no stepbrothers, half-sisters, widowers, and so on. Everybody was a complete human being. And it occurs to me that this is an indication of something profound about African culture. That is a very human culture. That when you encounter Africa on its own terms, there are certain things, certain inhuman practices that become impossible. And here is something for us to consider. That it is African people who invented society and socialization. And by doing that, humanized a primitive creature we call humanity today, who was born without society, who was born, shall we say, raw, primitive. And we have been adding humanity to humanity. We humanize that primitive creature to make us into human beings. And we've been attempting to humanize our environment also. I don't want to push this too much, but I offer that as one of the things we could reflect upon and find our way in the kind of environment other people have made for us today. And I'm saying that in rebuilding ourselves in the image of our ancestors, that is rebuilding our African self, we restore not only individuals, communities, and an African world, which is a living alternative to those who oppress it, and a rebuke and a refutation of their methods, their ways of being. We know about the greed and the destruction and so on. We've got work to do. Let us advance our discipline, advance ourselves, be active in our own business, our own interest. Thank you very much.
Your mic is not on, Dr. Sante. Dr. Sante?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I want to thank you, Dr. Kimani Nehusi, for that presentation dealing with humanity, which we will discuss later. Really interesting and provocative. Dr. Crystal Temple, Associate Professor and former head of the Africana Studies Department at the University of Pittsburgh, is probably the most important Afrocentric literary scholar, in my judgment. Her books are classic writings and critical interpretations of African literature and African American literature. Her recent books include Transcendence and the African Literary Enterprise, Literary Spaces, Introduction to Comparative Black Literature, and Literary Pan-Africanism, History, Context, and Criticism. Dr. Crystal Temple.
Thank you, Dr. Sante, and thank you to everyone who's gone before me. Today I'm talking about culture, not always race. Race is also a distraction that we should seek to destabilize sometimes, at least when we articulate in detail the specific crises that appear in our African lives. So often our narrative about race is about deficits that require a balance with a narrative about culture that prompts us to be really specific about our worldview, our customs and traditions, our personhood and permanence. So today I share an intervention on the term post-racial, The goal is to correct the range of offensive and just blatantly incorrect public ideas circulating about the popularized term post-racial. A second goal is to readjust the public lens by replacing the word race with the word culture to clarify that when I encounter the term post-racial, I believe the user is signifying a desire for post-cultural African identity. The term post-racial announces inaccurate assumptions about the African-American self-concept. It is an insincere slogan that spreads outsider wishes for African-American assimilation and identity and heritage silence. Its rhetoric expresses a desire that African-American identity and heritage practices decrease rather than increase. The term is misrepresented as a variable of diversity, when in reality, the term's usage in spaces of public sentiment does not indicate pluralism. Simply identifying African people by our skin color and by the often overused grouping of race misses an opportunity, I say at least sometimes, to highlight the many variables inherent in our formal culture. In other words, race is a lived category and is capable of also representing culture, but let's talk about culture more. Since post-racial means post-cultural, I've chosen contemporary political, social, and literary counter-narratives to disprove the post-cultural assumptions about post-racialism. The first artifact is a political discourse, and that's the set of race speeches by Senator Barack Obama and the ensuing race speech that came a year later by Obama's chosen U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder. The second artifact is a social discourse, and this is the documentary The Black Candle, produced by M.K. Asante Jr. And the third and final artifact is a literary discourse, and this is the set of bookend plays, Gem of the Ocean and Radio Golf, that are the first and last chronological plays in August Wilson's Century Cycle, representing the experiences and worldviews of African Americans in the 20th century, decade by decade. In the Obama and Holder speeches as political discourses, it was apparent that the two African-American leaders, those speaking to broad multicultural American audiences, encoded their speeches with distinct cultural meaning that to Black listeners revealed an Africanologic and legacy points of reference. Obama confirmed his cultural identity by articulating his wife's and therefore his daughter's identity. He says, I'm married to a Black American who carries within her the blood of enslaved Africans and the whites who own them, an inheritance we pass on to our precious daughters. Obama symbolically uses the heritage of his Black wife to present the value of a dual racial cultural inheritance he passes on to his children. By describing his daughters as precious, he inscribes cultural value to this inheritance that remains Black like his wife in spite of the mixture of blood that her background embodies. By highlighting the white blood that runs through the veins of his Black wife, he self-defensively codes his Kenya-Kansas biracialism as also culturally Black. 1 year later, Eric Holder takes his cue from Obama by delivering a Black History Month speech on behalf of the nation with an African-American centered message that gives us a patriotic spin, a Black patriotic spin on the U.S. as a nation with an African core inheritance. His use of the word us is cultural. He says there's clearly a need at present for a device that focuses the attention of the country on the study of the history of its Black citizens so that the study of Black history and recognition of the contributions of Black Americans become commonplace. He then adds a bit of cultural inheritance specificity, noting that there is a list of key African-American figures who should be generally recognized by America and that all of us, Black and white, owe a debt of gratitude. He says, it's on their shoulders I stand. And so he centers African-American culture in the American roll call of identities. The documentary Black Candle, a social discourse, shows the holistic process of reintegrating African heritage consciousness into the cultural definitions of the African American, and it uses ethnography and counter-narrative to defend from offensive racial discourses, such as the rhetoric of post-racialism. It features African American ritual, including the customary practices and social rites of the community that are repositories of identity, of heritage, of memory, of the ancestry, of ethics and values. The daily lighting of candles, aesthetic practices of music, dance, and song, pouring libation, calling forth the names of ancestors like Holder also did, philosophical reflection, family bonding, and offering of harvest are all documented in this film about the holiday that Maulana Korega created in 1966. This is culture. The contemporary sampling of how the sacred functions in the Black family and the Black community reveals stability and both love and adoration of the ways of life that African people have sustained in the diaspora. And so this surely defines post-racialism and defines the culture of African Americans. Finally, August Wilson's plays Gem of the Ocean and Radio Golf as literary discourses show how African Americans in spirit, in ideology, in worldview, and even in the architecture of our home spaces are conversant with African heritage culture. In Gem of the Ocean, August Wilson crafts the protagonist on Esther as an ancestor with the power to inspire an African American philosophy of infinite intergenerational self-determination. In the play Radio Golf, Wilson shows how the character Old Joe carries Aunt Esther's memory in the play's central philosophical conflict regarding the nature and expectations of African American progress and leadership in the 1990s. So in essence, a woman from 1904 whose spirit embodies the African ancestors determines the fortitude of the community in 1997 as her home, a haven, is a sacred site of extended family respite and safe dwelling. So in conclusion, occasionally replacing the word race with culture allows us to maintain specificity in our descriptions of precisely what aspects of our powerful historical and future presence in the US and the world, what aspects they're attacking. If you want evidence that we are neither post-racial nor post-cultural, for proof, go read and listen to a speech. Go view a documentary on Kwanzaa, or read or view a performance of a play by August Wilson, or other artifacts that come from other cultures of Africa in the diaspora. Indisputably demonstrate the performances of African American personhood in cultural terms. And so featuring our cultural specificity as a counter narrative to the bland use of the word race clarifies that white supremacy is unhappy with our self-concept about what is worthy of honor, what is worthy of respect, what is worthy of remembrance, dedication, and what is worthy of reproduction. We're not going anywhere. In the best practices of Afrofuturism, this is an exercise in maximizing the conceptual weapon of lexical refinement as we refine our usage of the word race as needed with the specificity of not only the word culture, but a whole list and itemization of what culture entails. So when I hear the word race on the news, on Twitter, in the mouths of the pundits, in the mouths of protesters, I'm thinking about culture. And so those who have a problem with our race, they have in essence, a problem in essence with our collective culture. And this culture is our survival, our retentions, our adaptability, our flourishing, our sanity, our inheritance, our hero dynamics, our grit, our creativity, our aptitude. When they have a problem, when it seems like the appearance of us, no, you have a problem with our perseverance, our pride, our voice, our cleverness, our spirituality, our worldview, our customs, our traditions, our personhood, our permanence. When you have a problem with us and it seems racially and that word is thrown around, you really have a problem with our style, our definition, our legends, our heritage, our memory, our body language, our discourses, our sacredness, our resistance-based cognitions, our social rights. You have a problem with our ancestry, our bonds, our vision, our ethics, our counter narratives, our philosophies, our racial choices, our preciousness, our names, our rejections of white supremacy, our spirit, authority, self-determination, and self-actualization. So when I think about Sandra Bland, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, proud, Black, majestic, informed, just average Black, culturally resplendent folk, I remember how Maya Angelou in her poem asked, "Does my sassiness upset you? You want to see me broken? Oh, does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard." And then especially, I think of Harlem Renaissance poet Helen Johnson, who makes the same observation in her poem, Sonnet to a Negro in Harlem. She says, "You are magnificent. Your perfect body and your pompous gait, your dark eyes flashing with hate," and that's a hate for racism. She says, "I love your laughter, arrogant and bold. You are too splendid for this city street." Culture, not always race. Thank you very much.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, everybody's did applaud. Brilliant, as always, Crystal Temple. Thank you so much. Now, Dr. Siri McDougall, who is professor at Africana Studies at California State University in Los Angeles. He was formerly the chair of the iconic Africana Department at San Francisco State University. He is the author of the book, Research Methods in Africana Study, which actually is the first book of its kind in the field, which received the National Council of Black Studies Ida B. Wells Shake Out the Jope Award for Outstanding Scholarship in 2016, and the Shake Out the Jope Institute for Scholarly Advancement Excellence in Scholarship Book of the Year Award in 2015. His newest book is Black Men Studies, Black Manhood, and Masculinities in the U.S. Context. Dr. Siri McDougall.
Thank you. I want to express appreciation for the kinds of conversations that the series has been facilitating. Dr. Asante, Ms. Wilson, I feel honored to be in the company of the individuals on the panel. So thank you all, and thanks for for all of the attendees for the opportunity to discuss with you a topic that I think is critically important to the disciplines of Africology and the future of Black liberation struggles and struggles for racial justice. Particularly, I want to focus on racism in higher education and the consciousness transformation that Africology has and can have on the success of Black students in higher education. And also, I'd like to discuss the ways that Africology protects them from some degree of institutional racism and prepares them to deconstruct racism in the future. So what made me think of this this particular project was returning to Carter G. Woodson's classic work on the miseducation of the Negro, where he introduces the problem of the rupture between educated Black people and the conditions of the masses of Black people. And he said educated Black people had learned to focus on advancing their individual careers and not the conditions of the collective. And essentially this, without using those words, is alluding to a brain drain, which means a disconnect between the educated persons and their place of origin. But he claimed, although domestic in this case, and as well as international, I think, and he claims that Black people have mistaken the map for the territory, which is an old saying that means that we've mistaken the symbol for education itself. And Woodson calls for a new educational paradigm in his text where Black people have more autonomy over their education. And my question is, what role Africology plays in addressing this dilemma? Because I argued that Africology is the navigational system for people of African descent, for the African world. And Dr. John Henry Clark has a statement, he kind of builds on something that Frederick Douglass said a long time ago about the ship of state, but Dr. Clark says that basically that Africa is my ship and all else is open sea or a strange land. And he makes comments on the role of the scholar. And what I would argue is that Africology is best suited to be the navigational system for this ship of state. If we can call the African world a ship of state, then I think Africology is the best suited navigational system. And I started this research building on work that had already been done on Black studies, what was known as the Black studies effect and its impact on students of African descent in higher education. I've conducted about 3 empirical studies on the topic myself, in addition to what's already was done on the topic. And there are currently about 12 to 15 studies specifically on this topic. And the results show a wide range of findings about what taking Africology is related to for Black students, including self-concept, intellectual development, academic performance, retention and graduation, a sense of belonging, political consciousness, academic motivation, and coping with racism and other forms of oppression, and student engagement. So again, the purpose is to explain how Africology can prepare students to confront racism and advance communities of people of African descent. But before I talk about those main impacts that it has, there are a few assumptions that I wanted to address. And one is the need is something that has been our ancestors have been asking us to do for a long time, from Paul Robeson to Dr. Jacob Carruthers, and Dr. Pellerin she alluded to it as well. But the need to conceptually decouple the condition of warfare from military activity. Moreover, the educational experiences of Black students are already analogous to a battlefield in the sense that higher education exposes them to an array of toxic racist forces and stimuli that can be physically and mentally harmful too. But Black students have unique racial experiences in institutions of higher education, and what enhances their well-being and success is similar to other students, but also very different too. And Africology affects all students exposed to the pedagogy and curriculum, but it has very qualitatively distinct influence on Black students. And that the most radical action that students of African descent can take is to apply their knowledge and skills to serving the needs of communities of people of African descent, and to look at the African world in culturally informed ways. So Africology is one of the most important tools in the arsenal of people of African descent for fighting racism, for aiding them in the discovery and fulfillment of diverse life purposes, and diminishing the effects of anti-self subjugation. So it's a formula that can nurture the uniquest, it has a bonding capability of merging racial and ethnic identity with intellectual identity in ways that are unique from other academic disciplines. So this distinct blend of qualities produces an invaluable resource for the African world. So, and it's of course dependent upon factors being in place in terms of faculty and resources, et cetera. So one of the main effects of Africology is the support of the creation of space. I think that Dr. Ichile kind of created, I guess in the social technical world that we're in and the increase in remote learning, I think that Dr. Ichile kind of demonstrated how Africology can transform space, even if it's a physical location in a classroom or online. So it's the support of faculty, the high expectations of equitable teaching, relevant curriculum, like-minded peers together that create space in institutions of higher education that protect Black students from microaggressions and cultural isolation and alienation. And also gives them a sense of belonging, family, and community, which is going to be even more important in the future, because it's anticipated that there'll be even more sense of isolation and a need for a development of stronger sense of belonging if there's going to be increased like remote learning experiences. The second thing that Africology does is it has an effect on identity, and having a curriculum grounded in the history, cultures, and experiences and intellectual heritage of people of African descent gives them a sense of racial and cultural self-awareness and causes them to explore their own identity. And due to this creation of space, it makes them more comfortable exploring their own identities. And they start to understand Black people and culturally and ethnically unique, as culturally and ethnically unique, and gain an increased sense of racial identity, which is going to be important in the future because the Black population in the US, or people who identify as African or Black, is becoming more and more diverse. And also because the Black world is becoming more and more mobile than it's ever been before. So there are people who are African Americans who are traveling to African diaspora and Africa itself, and causing the encounter of customs, you know? So the scope of Africology is something that's going to be very needed in terms of addressing identity related questions the more diverse the population of Black people becomes. then there's the intellectual engagement impact that it has, that students, they learn intellectual approaches grounded in African reality, that are culturally grounded and politically oriented, and they gain a sense of academic confidence and motivation. And it's well demonstrated, but it's not well known how Africology helps students in all disciplines to matriculate and be persistent and complete their educational experiences, which is going to be extremely important in the future. And lastly is the impact of Africology and the effect that it has on agency. So it teaches students what should be done with knowledge, the purpose of knowledge, and they learn how it has been used in the past to make change. And it gives them the confidence that they can make change. And they begin to look at the world not just critically, but also creatively, which again, I think this points back to something that Dr. Achille points out. And that's the importance of a decolonized imagination. And that agentic sense of social responsiveness combined with decolonized imagination, I think is something that that Africology offers that no other discipline does as efficiently as Africology does. So it's going to be extremely important in the future for people of African descent. It's going to be very important, though, to build institutions outside of the academy, like Dr. Sante's, the Sante Institute, as well as similar institutions, because I think that one of the things that this time is reminding us of is the lesson of Reconstruction, that we need independent Black institutions, in addition to tie with Africology on the campuses of institutions of higher education. So, thank you very much.
Hey, thank you very much, Dr. Siri McDougall, as always, very insightful. We have a couple more speakers, and this has been already remarkable. Dr. Nadav, who is assistant professor at Africology at Temple University, a leading Jopian scholar, who has taught at SUNY Buffalo, Medgar Evers, Penn State, and she started teaching here actually back in the 1990s, I think, and as I often kid her, she would have been a full professor by now had she not taken several years away from university teaching to work for UNICEF in Africa and to work with Afrocentric schools in London. Her award-winning book, African Mothers, Barrels of Culture, Makers of Social Change, is probably the classic work in the field. She has also written several articles on African culture as world culture. So at this time, Dr. Nadav.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asante. I want to thank you for bringing us all together in at this very important time. And to thank you also for the development of Afrocentric theory and the Department of Africology, because in producing these ideas, you have created an episteme that enables people to see outside the current ones, which are all culturally grounded and actually created to suppress African reality and construct a picture of Africa and African people that is the opposite of what is true and what is real. So I thank you for that, and it's an honor to be with everybody. Thank you very much. I'm going to look at culture from a Jopian perspective, and I know that many people have been quite antagonistic towards Diop's work. They see limitations in things that he said, but I have built upon his ideas, and I think that he has opened a window that many of us have stepped through, or opened a door, if you like, and many of us have used bits of his concepts and so on. But the one that I'm going to use is the cradle theory, the idea that there are just two types of cultures. I'm going to reduce everything into very simple forms, but understanding the complex, that humanity is very complex and the way we live our lives is very complex, and we can come down to individuals. But I'm going to look at the big picture as a way to create an umbrella that we can look under. So I'm focusing on culture as an umbrella. I'm using Diop's idea of culture. He defines that there are two cultural forms, and both of them rest upon the smallest relationship in humanity, and that is the male and female, or the man and the woman. And in these two cultures, he's really saying that we begin with one culture, that is the African culture, which is based on male and female reciprocity, female and male reciprocity, which he calls African matriarchy, which is not European matriarchy, it's African matriarchy, which is Ma'atic, which is democratic and has and is based on the female-male balance, harmony. And then he talks about another culture, which is based again on the female-male relationship, but the male dominates the female. So it's built upon hierarchy, and in this hierarchy lies the first injustice. So we have humanity coming out of Africa basically with 70,000 years ago, Homo sapiens sapiens, and prior to that existing 250 to 350,000 years, and leaving Africa 70,000 years ago. And there is evidence of civilizations far older than Kemet, but anyway, Kemet is the focus, because here we see the crystallization of African values and beliefs in Ma'atic ideals, which can only exist as a result of female and male reciprocity. Now, the movement away from Africa and the changes in phenotypes, and there are many phenotypes within Africa as well, and the idea of European and Arabic and Indo-Aryan academics is to separate all these different phenotypes within Africa to show that we're all very different. We have thousands of languages, we don't understand each other, and to make us disparate groups, to fracture everything. So we move away from any human connection, any cultural unity, and we're all different. And in this way, it's really interesting, because both Europeans and Arabs conquered Africa completely, knowing that there were very similar values and beliefs and behaviors within Africa. So they actually, even though they put out the word that we're all very different to separate us, it's all part of conquest, so that we can't identify. So we ask questions like, well, how could somebody from the Yoruba nation know anything about somebody from, from the Akan people? We're all so different. So these borders that have been created in Africa by all the invaders and murderers of African people, and the stealers and theft of African ideals and so on, all these people can comfortably live there identifying themselves as different groups, but actually they're culturally similar in so many ways, because all of those are the ones who had the male-female imbalance, the first patriarchy, the first injustice. And these groups are the ones who want to maintain power. Now, the problem with well, it's a massive problem, but the problem with the domination of the female and that first hierarchy and that first injustice is that out of that come behaviors and values of people who can languish while another person does all the work, and exploit the energies of that person and live quite well, have time to think about self, and because there's a reliance on somebody else to do the stuff. This is the first patriarchal, this first hierarchy. And then the male and female in this hierarchy then collaborate to develop a hierarchy of humanity. And I'm looking at that as the cultural construction. And in this human hierarchy, they have based it on color, on the amount of melanin in skin. So they've constructed a racial hierarchy which comes out of that type of mentality where you dominate. In order to dominate, you have to be a liar, you have to be aggressive, you have to be hypocritical, because it certainly isn't true that women need to be dominated or that they are inferior to men. And so when you see that collaboration and then the creation of race as a way to hierarchicalize other people, then you see how it can transform from having a family in which men are privileged and women are not, to a global perspective of the whitest at the top, yellow, red, brown, and black at the bottom. And what's interesting about that construct is that those people who've created it were taught by the people at the bottom. So what they've done is very clever. They have made it seem through their texts, through their holy books and so on, and holy ideas, that the blackest people deserve to be there. But these blackest people were, in fact, the teachers, and they were the learners, and they've placed themselves at the top so that they can continue to plagiarize, to use the energies of the blackest people, to do whatever they want with them, to take the lands, to do everything. And they have left a legacy of race and the idea of human hierarchy with all of us. So we have been inculcated in our minds through culture, because culture is everything to human beings. We produce it and are produced by it. It teaches us how to think, how to behave. It gives us, it shapes our minds shape culture. So when we dismiss culture and don't really look at it, we're dismissing the most powerful thing that impacts on our minds. If you look at race as a way of determining humanity, people are stuck inside these different color melanated boxes, and there are expectations that are attached to humanity in these different color schemes. And it's very difficult to escape that because it's firmly ensconced in our brains, and it's through culture that it is there. And if you understand the significance of culture, then you can see why it is that Black people do something and white people do other things that are completely outside what they're supposed to be doing, because race really limits who we are as human beings. And I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that agreeing that race is a falsification of reality, but at the same time, we live and die by that. And we ourselves collaborate in this mythical, crazy thing. You know, I'm a totally privileged person because of the color of my skin. I have done nothing to deserve that. You just look at me and I'm a superior person. Now, when inside me, I believe that, and we're all supposed to believe these things, when I believe that and then look at my sister at the bottom of this heap of humanity, color-coded, and actually believe that she's inferior to me, is because I don't know the history, I don't know my culture, I know nothing. It's all been suppressed, and it is part of conquest. So we live in the US, growing up in schools that teach us nothing about who we are, why we're here. Well, we know why we're here because of the normal story that's put out there, but we really don't know. And, you know, Afrocentric theory it has enabled us to actually freely, to an extent, you have to, you know, keep in mind the disciplines that we may be using that are all racist, except for Afrocentric theory, which builds an understanding of what is Africa to humanity, and moreover, it enables people to build a real picture outside the fake ones that we're all inundated with every single day. So I know my time's out. You know, we're living in a continuous time where African people are killed. It's the blackest skinned people who are endangered in the whole world. You know, we look at our Kushite ancestors living in the Sudan, being the women and the men being castrated, the women still being enslaved, you know, and in the Brahmin system, which they call caste, which is really race, you know, the blackest people there, and then the untouchables below them, and how they're treated. Women are raped every few minutes and killed every few minutes. All this out of this falsehood, which we live and is real, but it isn't real. This is a mental illness. It is a cultural imposition on our minds that we have to be very careful to unpick. And we do that through the discipline of Africology. We do it through Afrocentric theory because it is a non-racist construction. It's not built on all these lies. It's a seeker of truth. It's a seeker of humanity. It's a seeker of connection. We are all African people, but what happens? We can only look at location, look at Africa, the center of human civilization, locate ourselves in that story. What happened? What was the dislocation? When did it take place? You know, it's simple, but it's highly, highly complex, and I understand that. But I just put that forwards because I think it's relevant. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for profound analysis, Dr. Dove. In fact, I learn from you all the time, and I learned from you then. Thank you so much. Our next and last speaker, but last only because his name ends in S now, is my colleague, Dr. Aaron Smith, assistant professor of Africology at Temple University, the author of several articles and reviews that advance Afrocentric scholarship. He is the original rapping professor at Temple University, whose classes are often among the largest classes at Temple. His poetic gifts combined with his scholarship and his energy to work really has made him one of the most popular professors at Temple. He holds degrees in Japanese, African American studies, and is a student of Afrocentric culture. Dr. Smith has 3 forthcoming books on Afrofuturism, Barack Obama, and African American culture. Dr. Aaron Smith.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen and go ahead and get started. I won't be rapping today, but I will be helping to wrap it up. Slideshow. I'm just so full, as they say. I've been fed so well, and I thank you all for your presentations and your inspiration. Many of my heroes that I first saw at the Joke conferences and all that, it's just a pleasure to be with you. I got my time running, so I'll make sure I'm on point. Dealing with publishers lately, I've recognized a more outward objection and resistance to Afrocentricity. We always knew it was there. We were taught by those who taught us about the resistance in the academy, even in the creation of departments, including the first department here to offer that PhD here at Temple University. We've heard the stories about San Francisco State, but now I'm noticing personally, there's a more outward boldness in terms of the rejection of Afrocentricity. So I just wanted to make sure I share the state of affairs and utilize this platform while we have over 100 people watching to introduce some and remind others of the important nature of grounding our theories. Afrocentricity, Dr. Asante states, is a paradigm based on the idea that African people should reassert a sense of agency in order to achieve sanity. During the 1960s, a group of African American intellectuals in a newly formed Black Studies department at universities began to formulate novel ways of analyzing information. In some cases, these new ways were called looking at information from a Black perspective as opposed to what has been considered the, quote, white perspective, unquote, of most information in the American Academy. The Afrocentric paradigm is a revolutionary shift in thinking proposed as a constructural adjustment to Black disorientation, decenteredness, and lack of agency. The Afrocentrists asked the question, what would African people do if there were no white people? I often tell people if they're just getting introduced to this information, look at the video Decolonizing the University by Dr. Molefi-Kete Asante. And when people ask me what would the world be like without Black people, I love to stop them in their tracks and say, no people. With that, I'll go into some of the theories that I usually talk about and then the order of the day. There's a theory I talk about called Euro-obliviousness. And when we talk about this boldness, that we see in the nation, it's also affecting the academy, as I stated, but we see this new boldness. And I think that it's based a lot of times on a misinterpretation of the realities of history and of biology, as Dr. Nadov alluded to, and even Dr. Asante in the introduction, that we are all from one common root, but somewhere along the lines, the wiring has definitely gotten crossed. And I have a concept called Euro-obliviousness, and I define it as a cancerous racial and cultural cocktail of delusion, division, distortion, apathy, and death. It's a phenomenon which occurs when willful ignorance and self-deception are multiplied exponentially by revisionist historical narratives, the denial of systemic racial oppression in general, and the contemptuous rejection of African cultural and historical significance more specifically. And I think in many areas we see Euro-obliviousness. There's something I talk about called harmless remembrance. You see Tupac and Bob Marley and Malcolm X head to toe. And I guess in the future we can get ready for some Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan t-shirts to be being worn by those who occupy gentrified neighborhoods. And I'll keep it going, but I just want to introduce you. Historical harmful remembrance. I'm making a connection here between the desire to celebrate or at least take ownership of, as Bell Hooks says, devour the other with a t-shirt, with a hat, the same way that people used to, have these memorabilia and souvenirs of Black body parts. And here we see a piece of a rope that was sent with a letter, a man named Matthew Williams from Salisbury, Maryland. He was 25 years old. And this celebration of our destruction often is looked upon as a celebration of a legacy, when it's all often more, what I said before, the devouring or, of the other. And the insecurity of racial terror. the insecurity of racial terror. So it's interesting to make sure we see what we're witnessing and look more deeply. And I often tell people, when you look at it certain ways, you can never see it the same. So many people have seen this image, and I don't put this up here to trigger you. I put it up here to put it in a certain context. The transfer of a bloodlust, the same bloodlust that we witnessed, during the Ma'afa, the same bloodlust we witnessed during the lynching. So I need people to understand that that spirit is still alive. And if you know anything about mounting and channeling, then you know about how energy is transformed and transitioned and it's not destroyed. You understand how the African tradition looking at life and death is a continuous cycle. So when we look at these evil spirits and evil activities in the same way as cyclical and not able to be destroyed simply by ignoring them, then we can witness how they're being manifest in contemporary context by putting them in their proper historical context through the right Afrocentric lens. So there's dangers in this myth of civilization, whether it's manifest destiny or racial superiority. And when you see these modern day big game hunters who view people as animals and act accordingly, it's hard to solve a problem when you don't understand the inner workings and historical context. Dr. Asante says we got to start with chronology. We got to take it back far enough to even know what we're looking at. Sometimes if you have a lens and you get too close to an object, you won't even know what the object is. You got to draw the lens back at least far enough to understand what you're looking at. And I always say, if you had a scale and you change the numbers from 0 to 3, everything you tried to measure would be distorted. If you had a camera and you tried to adjust the white balance, and before you did it, somebody just yelled action, every color you tried to interpret would be distorted. So like the master teacher Asa Hilliard says, our brains are like supercomputers, and the more memory we have, the better we're able to engage phenomena and information. And that's why I'm presenting it like this today. But the message for today, to bring it to the contemporary context, and I often learn that you have to take some existing knowledge that they understand and add some new knowledge, meet them where they are to bring them to higher levels of consciousness. That's why I have Jehudi and I have Mr. Wayans there, just for your understanding of the method. The spook that sat by the court. The spook that sat by the court. I got about 3.5 more minutes, so I want to make sure I finish strong, right? Daniel, Attorney General, people were saying justice for Breonna Taylor. And I said, what does that justice look like? We need specifics. We need action steps. We need to at least be as sophisticated as the enemies of our people if we expect to be victorious over our people. I was studying the Haitian Revolution, and it said they would send the children up front, with instruments, so the people will be lulled into a false sense of security. And at the moment where they thought it was just some children singing, that is when the guerrilla warfare began, and people would leap out from the bushes with machetes and other weapons. So it's best to understand that war is deception, and the best wars are waged without firing a single shot. But if you must engage, you got to know where to strike to have maximum effectiveness. So you might be looking at somebody that within the next 8 to 15 years will be put in front of you as one of the first Black Man, don't let it happen. I don't care what you read and don't read and believe. You better understand the story of King Herod and strike before they get to grow. You got to understand the trajectory and know how to strike in an exponentially effective way. If you, it's like somebody saying, I wish somebody would take my sneakers, and then the person who took your sneakers is sitting right next to you in the cell, your name's on the sneakers, he got his feet up, you know who did it. You know who the bully is. You got one man more responsible for the denial of justice of Breonna Taylor than any other man on the planet, and he looks like one of us, word to COINTELPRO. What action do we take? After the marching, after the writing, after all the posturing, what actions do we take to send a message? With Nick Cannon, they tried to send a message. With Emmett Till, they tried to send a message. Taking the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan off of Twitter, and they're trying to send a message. When they try to delegitimize Ice Cube for centering black, they try to send, what message will we send to the enemies of our people that declare our women unsafe? Do we strike at the support systems of said enemy? We got time. We got time. I think it's important for us to know the difference between fruits and roots. We have to recognize the difference between symptoms, whether it's a presidential symptom or symptoms and systems. And recognizing that in that observation that you can't prune a problem, you have to get to the root. And oftentimes we're looking at a white symptom, a white fruit, and we don't even recognize the Black root because the person has planted seeds. And we're so busy focused on the latest, most obvious overt manifestation of systemic oppression that we don't even recognize when the main purveyor for the next 30 to 50 years, possibly the next Clarence Thomas, let me just keep it going and wrap it up. Act up, you can get snatched up, word to the city girls. So when I went to Cairo, I was always, marveling at this image more than many others. The deification of the feminine aspect was an amazing counterbalance to the patriarchy that we see here in America. And after that, I think the most impressive was right place, right time. I say time and place, tap, 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 I say to the young people, right? Tap in. The smiting of the enemy. The smiting of the enemy. So when it's time and your enemy is identified, it's not outside of the African tradition to not identify and deal justly with an enemy. That is perfectly within the African tradition. So whether through political means or whatever means you feel or deem, I'll get to this slide before I talk too much. This is my last slide. In conclusion, practical anti-racist steps. We need to invest more time and energy and effort in counterintelligence. If you're not as sophisticated as your enemy, you cannot expect liberation. We need some spiritual segregation. There's so much, discussions about economics and redlining and gentrification, but we need to separate ourselves from the demonic and evil and racist energies that are put forth on each and every day on a constant basis. The recognition of intentional distractions. You gotta see it coming, like a guy in the club when he try to talk to you, before he even walks across the room, the ladies be like, girl, just walk away when I walk away. He's walking this way. You can feel it, right? That intuition that we heard about so much earlier. Stay healthy so you can outlive your enemies. I often say, and I know a lot of people in here are probably engaged in very similar work outside of the academy, do twice as much underground as you do openly. I'll say that again, and they talk about cancel culture. I'll cancel myself because being out there, do twice as much underground as you do openly, the way that our ancestors did it with the quilts and the enslaved spiritual songs and, follow the drinking gourd and wade in the water. You don't got to tell everything you're doing, and protect the targets of your enemy, even if you disagree with them. Dr. Smith offered to pay the tuition for Morehouse, and he talked about reparations and a 2%. And right after that, they started investigating the brother. Even in the Griot, they're writing about, the brother. And I put TP because the next person I see who would be a victim potentially will be Tyler Perry. If he says one more time that he bought that land that's bigger than all them other studios that the Confederate people used to plan how to keep black people in bondage, I think we need to make sure, regardless of how we feel about the brother and his artistic expression, we need to make sure that the enemy of my enemy, I'll say no more. It's been an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure. I hope you got something from it. And I love you all, and I respect you all so much. And it's a pleasure just to share this platform with you. Afrocentricity forever. Victorious consciousness. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Smith, for wrapping it up and giving us the wrap of the conclusion. I just want to say, first of all, I have to thank a few people, and among them would be Belinda Wilson, who really orchestrated this whole thing, Priscilla Thermidor, Anya Jackson, Jasmine Evans, Michelle Bonilla, and Taharka Ade. They have helped us put this on. I've just been here with all of you, and I wanted to see what chats I want to just read you a couple of the chats. I think there were many of them. There's no way I could read all of them, but I do want to say that people were really happy. There were some special ones to some of you, very special. By the way, I don't know whether Dr. Castlehoon saw the one from someone who said that she met her once through a cousin from Kenya, Mararia. And that's just a personal one, but it was sent to everybody, I think. And then I want to just say that there are a number of, and I'm just going to choose. So don't think that, all of you were excellent, and everybody and people spoke on all of them. Marima Bebarina said that she saw a pregnant African woman when she was visualizing, and she wanted a pregnant African woman in the river. The safe place was in her community, surrounded by people, children running, music, dance, drumming and chanting and libation, etc. Tristan Samuel says, I love Kirikou. And then there were just so many wonderful, Saint Hilaire said, a nation of only African Black people in tune with nature and peace. That's one of the things that they saw. So a lot of people caught the visualization, and really that resonated with a lot of people in terms of the space that was taken. People saw their daughters and sons. Somebody saw a man from ancient Kemet, and so on. So that that was really something very useful. Some people said this was a diverse and wonderful panel to honor the richness and diversity of African people. Other people, somebody just wanted to shout out to the bison, and that was good. That was good. Yeah. So Dr. Gamich and Dr. Ichile, thank you for that, because the two people from Howard. And also, I want there are so many other people who were given shout outs. Amen to Dr. Rabaka. Those among us who need the most help receive the constructive help they need. Ashe, amazing conference. Thank you much. Thank you, Dr. Rabaka. Thank you. Ayo Sakai said, thank you for the seminar, Dr. Asante. If it is being shared, I'm interested in receiving a copy. Hotep, Dr. Nehusi, racism is seen as one of the defense mechanisms of difference, as it is a European construct. Thank you, Marcus. Shireen said, hi, Jimmy. Okay, I'm sorry. Is another way. Jimmy Kirby, okay, that was good. I'm just skipping many of them, but somebody said to Latanya Jenkins said, speak. Ayo Sakai said, preach, 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 preach. Go on. I think this was to Dr. Temple. Let it be known then, Dr. Temple. Ashe, wow, thank you, Dr. Temple. Lovely job, and so on. Fantastic. Then there was Marcus Baldwin. Afrocentricity is essential to the epistemological mission of African people. Siri McDougall, someone said, thanks. I completely understand. I'm teaching online for the first time in my career. A huge learning curve. Somebody was very, that's from Dr. Rabaka, I think. And other people, Dr. Hope Dove, to panelists, that was brilliant, so brilliant. Somebody to Dr. Na, you are one of my heroes. Thank you, from Angelina. Somebody else, Shireen, my darling Na, thank you so much. I'm so proud of you. That was so clear and concise. Jimmy Kirby, love and respect to Dr. Na Dove. Great to see you, Dr. Smith. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Dove. And then Yolanda Montalvo, wow, one of my colleagues from Rochester is here. Yes, antiracism is their term, not ours. Afrocentricity is our term. It is by definition counter to their preferred mindset, terminologies, anti-racism, anti-bias, white supremacy, etc. You were very clear. Thank you, Dr. Dove. So, okay, thank you so much for mentioning we met. It would be great to see your face. That's what Rahel said. Okay, so I think you get the idea. And thank you, Dr. Bondarico. He says, dear Malefi, thank you for inviting me to this incredibly inspiring event so much once again. Hope my brief and sketchy description of Africans in Moscow was in vain with the event's agenda. Thank you, Belinda, Jasmine, Priscilla, Anya, and Martha. Let me just say to all of you, guys are amazing. And I have many arguments and discussions and debates, but I'm going to take up my arguments and debates with you probably individually. But I just want to say one thing because I took notes on everybody, so I have notes for everybody. But instead of going through these notes, there's one thing I want to say. It takes me 5 minutes. To me, with the notion of Afrocentricity and the notion of beginning at the beginning, where we start with humanity and the origins of humanity, one of the things that I think that this construction, this cultural or social construction of race did, it really truncated the notion of holism and the whole idea of humanity. Because I think, and I have this discussion from time to time with many colleagues and with many people, I think when we have the race construct is about how you classify and categorize and ascribe to categories different traits and different abilities. And when that was constructed with the notion of the Aryans or the Nordics at the top and basically the Africans at the bottom, it was a ladder construction. Many of you have spoken on this today. It was that racial ladder. And that racial ladder created a situation where other things were classified and categorized, so that it really took away from the wholeness that we have to have and see from an Afrocentric point of view. When we look at ourselves in the middle of our own historical narrative, we have to look at it and say, well, how did we see the world? How did Africans see the world? And the way Africans saw the world was as humanity. We're all human. So you speak a different language, but you're still a human. You're shorter than our people, but you're still a human. You're taller than our people, but you're still a human. Your hair texture is different from than ours, but you're still a human being. If we could get away from race and this notion of this classification, not to get away from difference, we can't get away from difference. Many of you said that. It's correct. Difference exists. We can see and recognize difference. Difference exists in all forms, whether we're talking about gender or class, sexual orientations, differences exist. But the way to deal with difference is through humanity. You see a person as a human. This is why we have this. Well, that's not that y'all have more courses on queer this and queer that. I said, why? We're talking about humanity. If you're a human, you're a human. That's not a conversation. Unless you, of course, were in a queer department of queer studies, then you can talk about having to. But in Africana studies, what are you talking about? We deal with humanity. I don't care what your sexual orientation is. That's not my question. That's not an issue. I don't care what your class background is. I don't care what language you speak. That's where we fall into that category of this notion that the racial ladder has created, so that we have, and it was a concept that Dimitri has spoken of in some of his writings, but he didn't speak on it today, but it was okay that he didn't. But I thought it was a brilliant concept, this notion of heterarchy and homoarchy. Because in this concept, what he is arguing is that homoarchy is that where you have rigidly ranked elements, where say the caste system in India, the Hindu caste system. The Hindu's caste system gives you this rigidly ranked community where all these elements are. You just know where the Dalits belong, because the Dalits belong in a certain category. Because you see that, of course, and you know that, and the Dalits know that. The Dalits know that how they belong. In this society, where you have racism and the racial ladder, what happens is that even black people assume the position that, more and more of us are not, but assume the position there must be inferiority, because the racial ladder has been structured from the Aryan, Nordic, down through everybody else to blacks and Native Americans. That is a problem. And that's why we have to assert humanity. We're all human beings. And if you assert humanity, then it takes all kinds of, there is no distinction there. You see, there's only culture. Now, people have different cultures. We come from different cultural backgrounds, but the question of race itself, that is the problem. That's the falsity. And that is the problem that gives us all these issues that we have to deal with. I don't see, my father used to say, and he didn't understand theory that much, but he understood practical life. There is no such thing as inferiority or superiority unless people believe in that. He said, you can't be inferior to anybody unless you are. You have to believe that. You can't be superior to anybody unless you just think, well, everybody else is inferior. Those thoughts, then it corrupts everything. I want to say that. Then one other thing I want to say. That was 5 minutes. That was 2 minutes now. I want to just say, I want to just ask, and I don't know whether he's still here, but I just want, because I can't see everybody, but I just want to ask Raylan to just reconsider this notion of black radical. I have a problem with black Moses, black Napoleon, black radical, black anything. You either have a radical tradition or you don't. So why are we just radicalists? You see, to be a radicalist is something where you don't necessarily have to always say that we are something that, it's like a person saying, I'm a black Marxist. Wait a minute, you're either a Marxist or you're not. You can be a black person. But this categorizing of race does nothing more than promote and sustain this drive that exists out there for racializing everything. And I'm, as an Afrocentrist, I'm for trying to humanize everything in a whole different sense of looking at humanity, but respecting and honoring African culture as a significant cultural contribution to humanity. And in fact, the original contribution, as Dr. Dove was saying, with this whole development that is existing. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to, there may be, let me just ask the administrator, are there any questions in the chat? I didn't see, I don't see any current questions. The people do want to get a copy of this. Get a copy of this. I think that is it. Okay, are there any questions from any of you that's burning? You will get copies, the panelists will get copies of the presentations, okay? We will.
I'll make sure that they get the copy of it.
Okay, thank you all. You guys are wonderful, beautiful, outstanding. I love you all. Take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you very much. Bye.